What's up guys, it's Alex the Magician here, back for another Heroes 3 tier list video. And in this one, we are going to be ranking tier 4 creatures. So this is like the continuation of my dwellings tier lists. However, in this one, we're not going to be ranking the dwellings, since from tier 4 down, the dwelling itself will actually not be guarded by the creatures that you can recruit in there, right? So from tier 5 and tier 6 and tier 7, you do have to actually fight whatever the creature is before you can recruit them, right? And these dwellings, tier 4 down, they may sometimes be guarded externally, so they may still have a guard on the map itself, and that depends usually on the amount of zones that there are. So the more zones, let's say like you're playing Necro and you have, your zone is the only Necro zone on the map, then there's a good chance that a vampire dwelling will not be guarded. But if there's 2, maybe 3 zones, then there's a good chance that it will be guarded, because the value of the dwellings goes up with each additional zone. So the more zones you have, you may even have tier 3 and even tier 2 dwellings that could potentially be guarded because of that. So, but still, inside of the actual dwelling, these are not going to be guarded, so we are basically just going to be ranking these based on their utility, just how good and how useful the units themselves are. So let me know if you guys agree or disagree in the comments below, or what you would rank differently. And of course, remember, as always, as any tier list, this is opinion, right? So don't hate me if I rank your favorite unit too low or something like that. And do let me know if there's anything that you guys would like to see in future videos. If you guys give me an idea that I like, you may very well see a video with that. All right, so without further ado, let's just get into this. All right, the top spot, I really don't think anybody will argue with this one. It's the Vampire Lords, right? So with the Vampire Lords, you definitely want to get, or with the vampires, you definitely want to get the upgrade. I mean, there's like no reason to build regular vampires and not get Vampire Lords. But when you do get the Vampire Lords, they are just ridiculous. One of the most imba units in the game. They're not going to be super useful in a PvP situation where you're actually fighting the opponent, because the opponent is not going to let you actually abuse their healing ability. But when you're fighting against the AI and farming the map, these guys can clear everything with just their, well, not everything, right? They cannot clear things that they're not able to drain. So like undead or elementals, like golems, gargoyles, etc., they cannot drain, right? But with everything else, they can do a lot of breaks. They can farm conses and hives and pickets really easily. They can do utopias as well on a hero that has good enough stats. So if you can get a decent amount of these, which usually means as Necro you want at least 2, better like 3 or maybe even 4 external dwellings for vampires, and then you can build them in your town. And even if you don't utilize them to do the break, you can still utilize them on side heroes to farm everything in the center and farm your biome, as well as you're farming something more difficult to fight with your main hero, maybe on skeletons or maybe on whatever other army you have. So really, really, really useful if you can utilize this properly. It does take a little bit of practice to know how to use these properly. I've certainly died multiple times against breaks and against utopias when utilizing these, so you do have to kind of know certain things, and you have to know how strong your hero actually needs to be for these to take utopias and things like that. But when you get to that point, really, I mean, you do things with no losses and on just vampires. I mean, on a decent hero, even like 12 to 15 vampires will be enough to do a size 3 cons. 24 vampires will be enough to do most breaks, the breaks that they can drain. So yeah, really, really imba unit, and super super useful in terms of farming the map. Everything else on the list, honestly, these could be like in a league of their own. Everything else should probably be at least 2 tiers lower than the Vampire Lords. Nothing else even comes close in tier 4 when it comes to the utility that Vampire Lords bring. And really, Vampire Lords are one of the most useful units in the game, period, when it comes to that. All right, the next one that I'm going to rank is actually going to be Ogre Magi. And I'll give you guys the reason for that. So Ogre Magi are super tanky. The upgrade, so even the regular ogres are alright. They have 40 HP. The Ogre Magi, they have 60 HP. So that's a 50% increase in HP. And plus it also gives them that Bloodlust casting ability. So you can utilize that with 1 stacks or something if you want to. But the reason that I have these here is because Stronghold is a town that desperately needs something tanky. Because their units like the Goblins and the Wolf Raiders, they are not tanky at all. So with these guys, it's much easier to take hives, you know, and in general, just do fights where you actually need something to tank some hits, like maybe bring them into Utopias with you, etc. So especially if you can get the upgrade, the increase. So 60 HP as a tier 4 unit is pretty friggin' insane. There's a lot of tier 5 units that don't have that much HP. Alright, so next we are going to rank the Silver Pepega and the Acid. So both of these are really here because of their speed. And that is what makes them good. As units, you know, they're not super amazing. They're not that strong. The Silver Pepega over the regular Pepega has 4 more speeds, so they're speed 12, the fastest one on this list, which is really great. It ties speed with an angel, so, and if you actually, it is a 2-hex unit, so if you actually need to close the gap, you can actually do that with these guys even without tactics, and even if you're not on grass. They also have the mana dump ability, which makes the spells of your opponent cost 2 mana more, which can also help. And, you know, as far as the upgrade goes, the biggest benefit is the speed increase. The regular Pepegas have speed 8, and these guys have speed 12. So that's why you're getting the upgrade. And yeah, I mean, not much else to say about that. So useful in terms of speed, useful if you need to close the gap, useful as 1 stacks to speed up your heroes. As far as fighting ability, you know, sort of mediocre. You know, they kind of sacrifice the fighting ability for the sake of speed. I mean, they're not too bad, but they're not, of course, nearly as tanky as like the Ogre Magi, for example, and not nearly as useful as the Vampire Lords. Acids, kind of similar story. The regular Stormbirds have speed 9, Acids have speed 11. It also adds the Ferocity ability, which makes them strike twice if they kill something with their first attack. Really also similar stats, similar damage to the Pepegas. The Ferocity ability does give them a bit extra damage, so they can actually, you know, do a decent amount of damage to weak units, like if you want to close the gap with shooters, like Gremlins or something like that. You can definitely, you know, with that double attack, you can definitely do some damage. But overall, both of these, the problem with them is that they're pretty fragile. So you can close the gap, you can you know, maybe take out some weaker units with them, but they're really not going to live that long. So biggest utility for both of these is speed, and Silver Pepegas are definitely a bit better because they're speed 12, and as I mentioned, with speed 12 you can close the gap with a 2-hex unit. The Acids are speed 11, so on Swamp you could close the gap, but on any other terrain without speed boosting artifact, you're not going to be able to close the gap with these. Alright, next I'm going to rank the Crusader and the Arch Magi. So Crusader, really good upgrade also. It basically gives you the double strike, right? Regular swordsmen and Crusaders have really similar stats, similar damage. Crusaders do have one higher speed, but they strike twice. So when utilized properly, you can definitely do a lot of damage with that. So it basically just doubles the damage that they can do, damage potential. But as I've mentioned in my creature abilities video with double strikes, you gotta make sure that you understand that you either should take retaliation from whatever you're hitting, or you understand that you take some damage after if you don't kill them with that first hit. So after that first hit, the defending creature will retaliate, and then you hit the second time, right? So you just need to kind of play around that, or just make sure that you understand that you will be taking some damage with them. All right, Arch Magi, I would say, is the only shooter on the list. There is another shooter on this list, but I'll get into that in a minute. I would say the only useful shooter on the list. The upgrade from regular Magi to Arch Magi actually doesn't give you that much at all. Stats are similar. The HP is similar. These guys just get better speed, but as a shooter, you don't really care that much about the speed. They also have no melee penalty and no barrier penalty, and they also have a useful ability like the reverse of the Pepegas. They reduce the mana cost for you. So spells for you are 2 mana cheaper. So that can definitely also come in handy. Decent unit, I would say. I mean, I would say the only tier 4 ranged unit. So, not necessarily nearly as useful as like the vampire lords, but in certain situations can be decent if you can protect them, if you can kind of keep them, safe. All right, next we're going to have the energy elementals, basilisks, and the demons. So all three of these, they're not super amazing. Their stats are pretty similar, and their fighting ability is pretty similar. They're okay units. They're not that bad. But the thing is that their upgrade really doesn't do a whole lot. So for the energy elementals, the upgrade increases their speed by 2. It does also give them the ability to fly, whereas the regular fire elementals are actually not flying creatures. The basilisks basically just get a 2 speed increase, and the demons also get a +1 speed and slightly better stats. And I think maybe like 5 more health or something like that. So really, I think one of the most useless upgrades is the demons, and they only cost like 20 more gold to recruit. So the upgrades are not super amazing. The units themselves, marginal utility. I would say basilisks mostly, for most of these, they're meat really, as meat in hives, meat in consoles, in whatever, when you do need something to tank. They all are relatively okay at tanking. The energy elementals, the nice thing about them is their fire immunity, so you can use the fire elementals or the energy elementals to do some kind of armor bombs, etc. So that is the nice thing about them. Yeah, the basilisks and the demons mostly serve as meat, unless, of course, you're farming demons as Inferno, and then it could serve as your power stack potentially. All right, and the last one, the other shooter on the list that really I almost don't even classify as a shooter, is the Medusas. So the Medusas, they only have 4 shots, the regular ones, and the Medusa Queens have 8 shots. So really terrible unit. Their health is really low also, and like it's a shooter. They have no melee penalty, so it's almost like they're trying to be in between a shooter and a melee creature, except they're not good at melee, they're not tanky, and they die pretty quickly. They do have the ability to stone, same as the basilisks, but overall, I would just say, not that useful of a unit. Most of the time just serves as meat in hives, maybe conses, but less so than the basilisks and the horned demons, because they are just not as tanky and they don't have as much HP. So as far as tier 4 units go, dungeon units in general are not necessarily the greatest. Like, their manticores are weaker than most other tier 6s. And the Medusas are also pretty weak as far as tier 4 creatures go. So, when you compare like the top and the bottom here, the amount of utility that you get out of the Vampire Lords is insane. And then the amount of utility you get out of Medusas is really pretty low. And also, in a lot of cases, you don't even want to be flagging these dwellings for the Medusas, because in a lot of cases, you're going to be portaling, either dragons or maybe manticores or maybe minotaurs. So you really don't want to give yourself the chance to spoil the portal in the next week in a lot of cases. So for that reason, their utility is diminished even more, because you're likely not going to have very large numbers of these. Alright guys, well that's it for the tier 4 unit tier list. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, feel free to check out my Twitch stream, link in the description below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.